Brooklyn Independent Television.
Hello and welcome to Brooklyn Elected Officials. I'm District Attorney Charles Hynes, and I'm joined today by Swern, who's the first Assistant District Attorney in the Office of the Kings County District Attorney. And thanks, Ann, for showing up here. So, Ann, you've been in the District Attorney's office for how long?
32 years.
Good Lord. Did you start when you were 6? Now, what was your first job when you got out of law school?
The Brooklyn DA's
Okay.
job.
And
Yeah.
where did you work?
I worked in the criminal court.
Right.
I worked in the early case assessment bureau. In those days, we did 12-hour shifts for
Right.
7 days straight.
Oh, wow.
And then I did everything that we do in the office. I wrote an appeal. I did misdemeanor trials. I did investigations. I did felony trials. I did a murder trial. And I did supervisory work.
And at one point, you ran the criminal court.
Yes.
I mean,
that was one of my best jobs.
That
I
must have
loved
been a
that
great
job.
experience.
I loved that
Going back
job.
there as the boss.
I love that job because it touches, even though they're the misdemeanor cases, it touches many more people's lives than the felony cases, thank God. That means that there are far fewer serious crimes than there are less serious crimes, but it touches many victims and many defendants, and therefore I love the job.
Explain to the folks how felonies get involved in the criminal court.
Okay. Well, when a person's arrested, the police determine the charges, and the police decide whether the appropriate charges of the felony and the misdemeanor at the first instance. But we in the district attorney's office take a second look at that in our early case assessment bureau. And frequently, although on paper the case looks like a misdemeanor, in fact, it's more appropriately handled in the criminal court. So that's a case that started as a felony, perhaps, but ends up being prosecuted as a misdemeanor.
So all cases in Brooklyn, whether they're felonies or misdemeanors or violations, at the first step, they're in the local criminal court. Is that correct?
Yes, by and large, the first court appearance, which is called the arraignment,
Right.
in our court in New York City, happens in the criminal court. There's only one minor exception of that, and that's a self-initiated investigation. If our office does a serious investigation of felonies, we might indict the case, and the first court appearance might be a felony indictment, which would be in Supreme Court.
In the Supreme Court.
Arraignment.
Very good. Now, you've been involved in something that's in general called problem-solving justice. The great former chief judge of the New York State Court of Appeals, who ran our court system so very, very well, Judith Kaye, called it problem-solving courts. And what you did, if I understand correctly, was to adjust that to apply to us as problem-solving justice. What's that all about?
Okay. Problem-solving justice. Lawyers are problem solvers. That's basically what we are. People come to us and they ask us to solve a problem. And there are many ways to solve problems. For problem-solving justice, it's to look at the justice system and say, what's the problem and what's the most effective way of solving the problem, or in our case, enhancing public safety. And so there are two types of problem-solving courts or problem-solving justice programs. There's the therapeutic model, which is a drug addict gets arrested, a mentally ill person gets arrested, and they are going to keep getting arrested for the same behavior unless we address the underlying problem, which is substance abuse or mental illness, untreated mental illness. So for those kinds of programs...
Stop just for a moment. And I'm sure there's people watching this and will ask the age-old question. What is a prosecutor doing getting involved in these programs? Isn't your primary, if not exclusive, responsibility to the people of Brooklyn to prosecute people who commit crime?
Yes, we are prosecuting them in an effective way and in a just way when you call it problem-solving justice.
It sounds like you have these social service programs. You know, why is that the job of the DA?
Because the job of the DA is to keep Brooklyn safe, and the way you keep Brooklyn safe is by interposing a therapy that prevents future crime. Substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment for a person who's committing the crime because of their mental illness or because of their substance abuse will stop committing the crimes. And because recidivism is the #1 future crime predictor. The best predictor of crime is someone who's already committed a crime. You stop that cycle when you intervene with a therapeutic result, and that's mental health or substance abuse mostly.
But isn't the traditional school on prosecution conclude that the reason that crime rates dropped so precipitously is that we had more and more people in prison? Didn't that work?
No, as you have said many times on this show and to all of us, you can't build your way to public safety. Building prison after prison and storing a person in prison for a period of time might keep it safe for the period of time that that person's in prison, but it doesn't keep us safe if that person comes out and is untreated. And many people don't need to go to prison or deserve to go to prison to keep Brooklyn safe.
Okay, now you took over as one of your many responsibilities, I think even before you became first assistant, you took over drug treatment alternative to prison, which is known, I guess, in many parts of the country now as DTAP. And you took that model and made significant changes. Can you explain the original model and what was the reason for it, what was the goal, and then how that's been changed by your modification, and what has been the benefit, if any?
Well, as your audience probably knows, in 1990, you created the DTAP program, which is drug treatment alternative to prison. And what the bold move in 1990, which may not seem bold in 2012, but was that you took the most serious offenders, people who were predicate felons or people who had been convicted of more than one felony offense and were destined to go to state prison for a minimum of 4.5 to 9 under the Rockefeller drug laws. And you realized the senseless nature of that and the cyclical nature of that it kept happening over and over again, and you said there had to be a better way. So you reached out to your partners in the drug treatment world and you devised a model that said basically those offenders who had multiple felonies were probably going to state prison for 2 years because everything gets plea bargained down, just like the drug cases did. So if they were going to spend 2 years in state prison with nothing good happening, what could we do comparably that would keep the public safe? And then you got your treatment providers to say, okay, we will provide quality substance abuse treatment for a period of time up to 2 years, for the same period of time they would have been in prison, and see if that works. So that was the model. The change in the model was that originally it was a deferred prosecution model. The prosecution was being held in abeyance while the person tried treatment. If the person failed treatment, the prosecution would continue. If the person succeeded in treatment, the case would be dismissed. But the problem of that model was twofold. Number one, there were too few people in the program. When I took over, there were only 30 people in the program. And the reason that was because if you wanted to have a case that stayed viable for the period of time a person would be in treatment, you needed a certain kind of case. And that case was an undercover buy and bust of drugs, where stash, meaning the comparable kinds of drugs, and the buy money, meaning the marked money, was recovered. Because that kind of case, the evidence stayed no matter if the witnesses moved or memories faded. And so that was the only kind of case. But if the police weren't deployed in that way with undercovers making those buys, you didn't have those cases. So we went to the defense bar, our partner in many of these problem-solving techniques in the justice system. The defense bar said, we don't care if it's a deferred prosecution or a deferred sentencing model. We want more of our clients to get the benefits of treatment. So we went to the deferred sentencing model, which is the defendant pleads guilty up front and is promised a prison term if he or she fails in treatment. If he or she succeeds in treatment, then the defendant is permitted to withdraw the plea and the case is dismissed. Clinically, the reason why that's a better model is because everybody's on message about failure and success. And in fact, the research showed that when we changed from a deferred prosecution model to a deferred sentencing model, our 1-year retention rate went up 14 percentage points.
The research you're referring to is the CASA research program, and that's the, what's the acronym for CASA?
The Center for Addiction and Substance Abuse Services.
Okay. And they had a 5-year study of DTAP, correct?
Correct.
And what were some of their findings?
Their findings were that it was half as costly to put a person in treatment rather than process them traditionally through the criminal justice system, that people were 87% less likely to go back to state prison after having had DTAP versus having been traditionally prosecuted and sent to state prison, and that people were 6 times more likely to be employed after DTAP than before DTAP.
Mm-hmm. And then that's a key component of the program, that the employment component.
Yes, the employment component is key, and recidivism was reduced by more than 50% at every stage. So at 1 year out, up to 5 years out, that the 50% reduction in recidivism, which means reoffending.
And so the folks who are watching who may have seen the segment with my counsel, Lance O'Geese, and John Cheney, the executive director of our reentry program, I think they see the linkage between rehabilitation, recidivism reduction, and employment. Now, there's about 175 drug courts in New York State, and that really says that prosecutors all over the state, the 62 elected prosecutors, have concluded that it's wasteful to put people in prison for their drug addiction, and that it doesn't do a thing about reducing recidivism. What about Brooklyn? How many drug courts do we have, and how does our drug court compare to other drug courts in the state?
We have the largest drug court in the state and in the city. The first one in New York City and the largest in the state. It's called the Brooklyn Treatment Court. And from that court, it's actually a national model, and people have come to study how that court operates. We have a wonderful judge, Joanne Ferdinand, who presides over that part since its inception, and we have a prosecutor who's been in that courtroom for quite some time. The defense attorney also is assigned there on a regular basis, and the viewers are invited to come down to our courthouse at 320 J Street on the 15th floor and watch it any time. It's really something to see. And that's our main drug court. We have a misdemeanor drug court, which was the big challenge, because it's one thing if you're facing a lot of state prison to go to long-term treatment. But what if you're facing a slap on the hand because it's a small amount of a possession of drugs, but the person's a long-standing addict? They threw down the gauntlet. They said, you could never do a misdemeanor drug court that's effective because you don't have enough time with the person. And so what we did in Brooklyn, which was different at the time, is we said, okay, you're right. If we wouldn't normally have jurisdiction over the defendant for any length of time, we shouldn't be in their lives for this purpose. But people who had 8 or 12 prior very small drug cases, possession of one glassine, possession of one vial, then that person who repeatedly gets arrested for small amounts of possession ultimately will probably spend some time incarcerated after repeated convictions. Mm-hmm. And those people go to our misdemeanor drug court, which is presumptively 8 months of treatment. And that's why it has a very good success rate, because the number one predictor for drug treatment success is the length of treatment. It's not how old you are. It's not the drug you're addicted to. It's not your education. It's not your gender. It's how long you're in treatment. So keeping a person in treatment for a long period of time is the best remedy to address drug addiction.
Now, do we only have 2 drug courts?
No, we also have the only one of these kinds in the state as well. We have a STEP part, which is screening, treatment, and enhancement part. When we looked, Judge Kay in 1999 commissioned a group of people, and you and I were on that commission, to look at drugs in the court on a statewide basis. And they said there are a lot of people who are addicted to drugs that are not only charged with drug offenses, and what do we do with them? And so the thought was, how do you screen a person coming into the court system in that way if they're not arrested for drug cases? So in Brooklyn, we have the only part that's set up to do that. All felonies come in to, all nonviolent felonies come into our STEP part, where the first question that's asked is, do you have a problem with alcohol or drugs? And then we look to a therapeutic remedy as long as it's a nonviolent case. And in fact, in Brooklyn, occasionally, we will even look to a case of violence if the person's the lookout and has not displayed a weapon, and we will look to see if the genesis of that crime behavior is drug addiction.
Well, who makes the assessment? The prosecutors?
Yes.
So what kind of clinical experience do they have to make that kind of an assessment?
They make the assessment as the case appropriate for the part. Then the clinicians decide whether the person is treatment eligible. But we, for example, even if a murderer murdered somebody and was addicted to drugs, we wouldn't send them to drug court. Right. So at the first instance is public safety. And that's why people are really comfortable putting this decision in our hands, because we care about the public safety. We're the vanguard of the public safety, and we believe that treatment will keep the public safe.
Any other drug courts in Brooklyn?
Yes, we have, well, as part of our community court, which is out in Red Hook, and I invite your viewers also to come out to, not today, unfortunately. Red Hook is steeped in water, and it's been one of the neighborhoods very hard hit by the storm, and our hearts go out to all of the residents of all the communities hard hit. But Red Hook was one of those particularly hard hit, and our court
Gerritsen Beach, Red Hook.
Gerritsen Beach,
yeah.
Coney Island, and places outside of Brooklyn as well. But Red Hook, I was just reading an email this morning about Red Hook opening, and right now they're sending the hazmat teams into it because of what's floating around in that courthouse. So the cases had to be adjourned downtown, and they will. And the therapeutic approach, including the drug court component of our community court, will be had downtown until we get Red Hook back in opening, because it is a shining example of a community court.
There's another problem-solving justice program that you were intimately involved with, and again, Judge Kay, who we really miss. I mean, we have a great new chief judge in Jonathan Lippman,
Yes,
but Judge Kay is someone who is really the trailblazer. And she always said that if she wanted to start a program, she always came to Brooklyn. Teleview is about another program that we're very, very happy about, and that's what we're proud about. That's our mental health court. And what does it do?
Yes, our mental health court is outstanding because our mental health court, number one, addresses seriously and persistently mentally ill people, which is a specific type of mental illness. It's major depression, it's schizophrenia, it's bipolar disease. And what the concept is that untreated or misdiagnosed mental illness may produce the impetus to commit a crime. And should the person be properly diagnosed or properly treated, that will stop future crime. And what we've done in Brooklyn, which is really to your credit, is that we look at all types of cases to include in that. And we were very open-minded. The prior mental health courts before ours only dealt with very, very low-level cases. And we knew that. But a constituency came to us and said, please consider us for mental health court too. And that was unlikely. That was the parents of mentally ill adults who were being were crime victims because of the mental illness. So say a 55-year-old man who's mentally ill was living with his 80-year-old mother, and he would not go to the doctor, he would not take his medication, and in fact was stealing from her or doing things like that. She never wanted to go to the police, she never wanted to go to the authorities, but she also wanted her son to get help. And as he got older, she got worried that she wouldn't be here forever to take care of him, to provide the housing. And so ultimately, in frustration, after being the victim of that crime, she would come to the authorities, but she wouldn't want her son to be in jail. She would want her son to be in treatment. And that was one of the impetuses for us to expand our concept of who should go into the mental health court.
And that was the first mental health court in the state, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
How many do we have now? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea we have now, but I know there's a very successful one in the Bronx as well, and there's a very successful court also in Buffalo, New York.
So walk us through the steps. Someone is arrested for a crime and is assessed as being eligible for a mental health court. What happens to them? What happens to their case?
Well, we need to backtrack a little bit because mental illness is not like substance abuse. Frequently, you can tell from the paperwork that the person is a substance abuser because of the prior record, the kinds of crimes that they committed. But mental illness doesn't show up like that. So, number one, it takes a lot of outreach, and the defense bar is our partner in this, the court is our partner in this, about whether or not the person seems to need mental health intervention. We have great intervention points in Brooklyn, probably the best network of any place. If it's a very low-level case at arraignments, a group called TASK, Treatment Alternatives to Street Crime, hired a doctor, a psychologist, who basically works night court and works down just interfacing with mentally ill offenders who would not stay more than overnight in jail, turnstile jumpers and things like that, and hooks them up with services and tries to make sure they see services. So they don't stay in the court for any longer than they would, but they do use the crisis of the arrest as an impetus for mental health treatment. If it's a more serious case, they would either go one of two places. They would go to EAC Link, which is Educational and Assistance Corporation's program where they do mental health treatment, or they would go to our mental health court and get mental health services there. The other exciting thing, and I'd love to say that now because we're coming on Veterans Day, and you yourself are a Marine, and we have a lot of Brooklynites who've served this country beautifully, and we are so grateful. But we know that some people come back from combat and come back from military service, and suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, suffer from other mental illness, and it's difficult for them to access services for reasons unique to veterans. And so we have overlaid all of our problem-solving justice, our courts, our DTAP program, our diversion program, with a veterans component, which is basically the two things. Number one, that they access all the benefits to which they're entitled, because sometimes the veterans don't know or can't access the benefits to which our government gives them. And number two, to know where the services that they particularly need to get, including a lot of peer support. Veterans do really well with peer support, and so we have a veterans overlay. And in fact, our Brooklyn Treatment Court has a concentration in veterans assistance as well. And
you're now and have been for a while, an adjunct professor of law?
Yes.
And the course you teach is problem-solving justice, right?
That's
so
right.
Why don't you tick off the curriculum for us, because we are getting short on time.
Okay. The curriculum is much of what we spoke about here. The students the first week come in and learn the basics about problem-solving justice. The second week they go downtown to a regular arraignment part where arraignments happen all the time. After that, there are some court visits. They see the mental health court. They see Red Hook. They juxtapose what a problem-solving court looks like to a regular court part. They do debates. They have to do 2 papers. And the last lesson, which we added recently, what has to do with your prior show on ComAlert, we have the participants in ComAlert need to get jobs. They need to do mock interviews in order to get jobs. The law students pretend they're the employers. They get the profile of the employers, and they actually do the interview of the ComAlert participants, and then the law students critique the ComAlert participants.
And how long have you been teaching this course?
About 7 years.
Right.
And before that, I taught something called the Prosecutor's Clinic at Brooklyn Law School.
Now, other than these programs you run and you're teaching, do you ever get out of the office to act like a real prosecutor?
Yes.
Give us an example.
Well, first of all, I think I am a real prosecutor when I'm doing this. And I think I'm a real prosecutor when recently, I asked your permission, and I tried a case in Red Hook.
Tell the viewers about the case.
Okay. There were a series of gunpoint robberies in Red Hook, daytime robberies of bars. And it was very frightening to the residents of Red Hook. And there were a series of them. And the police apprehended 2 of the people. They had to be tried separately. The person whom I tried was the mask-wearing gun wielder. So as you can imagine, you cannot identify a person wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. However, it took quite some time. It took 2 years to identify him via DNA. Mm-hmm. The FBI and the police were able to identify him via DNA, and I tried him about 1.5 years ago, and he was convicted of robbery in the 1st degree. And
how long was the trial?
The trial actually was about 3 weeks.
My goodness. And how much time did he get?
20 years.
20 years.
Yes, he was using a semi-automatic weapon, and he had done a number of daytime gunpoint robberies.
Now, you hadn't tried a case in many, many years, right?
That's right.
And did you have any problem getting back into the courtroom?
No, I loved it.
Because it's something you never forget, right?
You never forget it, and it's more wonderful with time, for me.
What's the best thing about your job? And don't be putting it over here. All right? What's the best thing about your job?
Oh, that every day it's not boring.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because every day there's something really interesting that happens, that's meaningful, that's relevant, that other people go and want to talk about it. I was at the doctor the other day, and he wouldn't let me out of the office because he wanted to talk about the job. People are very interested in what we do because it's so meaningful. And the way we do it is really great, and that's because you inspire us, all of 1,100 of us every day.
Now, you're a member of the Board of Directors of the National DA's Association. You're also a member of the Criminal Justice Section of the American Bar Association. What have you been able to do from those 2 perspectives with respect to criminal justice? How have you improved criminal justice from those 2 positions?
I would say we have done that,
okay.
First of all.
I'll take that.
Okay. And we have done that because some people are afraid to trailblaze. They're afraid, 30 years ago to have a drug treatment program for serious felony offenders. But when other prosecutors do it, there's research behind it, it's effective, it's lauded, the public accepts it, it makes it much easier. So you always use the example of reentry and our friend from a state we won't mention who was not interested in doing reentry until you blazed that trail. I think a lot of what we do at NDAA, the ABA, and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys is share our experience so that they're comfortable doing innovations and problem-solving justice the way we've been doing for the past 23 years.
And you've been teaching at Brooklyn Law School, how long is it?
Altogether, probably about 12 years.
But when you began teaching there, you didn't do problem-solving justice.
No, I did. I was a prosecutor's clinic.
Okay.
Basically, it's like having assistant DAs, but they're law students. They have cases. They go to court, and they can even second seat a trial.
And how long have you had this other, excuse me, we're running out of time, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, that's all the time we have. I want to thank my guest, First Assistant District Attorney Ann Swern. Thank you for watching Brooklyn Elected Officials. Terrific.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at bricartsmedia.org/BIT.